The wind howled across the open plains as Christmas Eve settled over the valley, carrying with it a cold sharp enough to cut through even the thickest wool coat. Clara Pearson tugged her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders as she stepped down from the stagecoach, her boots sinking into snow that reached halfway to her ankles. She was trembling partly from the cold, but mostly from fear. This was supposed to be her fresh start, yet she wasn't sure she deserved it. The station master pointed toward a distant flicker of light, Elias Thornton's ranch, a place she had only read about in a brief letter. A few acres of land, a small cabin, a solitary man looking for a wife before winter grew harsh. Nothing in his words had hinted at cruelty or expectation. He had simply written, "A quiet home needs a quiet partner. If you wish for the same, you are welcome here." But Clara was no longer the woman who had answered that letter. The weight beneath her coat, the child she carried, was the truth she dreaded revealing. Every step toward the cabin felt like walking toward judgment she couldn't bear again. Townsfolk had whispered behind her, agency clerks had frowned, and families had turned her away. A pregnant woman without a husband was a scandal. A mail-order bride carrying another man's baby was even worse. When she reached the porch, she paused. Light spilled through the frosted window, warm and golden, so different from the cold gnawing at her bones. She almost turned back, but her legs ached, her breath came shallow, and the baby fluttered weakly within her. She didn't have the luxury of pride anymore. She needed shelter, if only for a night. She lifted her hand and knocked. Footsteps approached inside. The door opened, releasing a wave of heat that wrapped around her like a blanket. There stood Elias, broad-shouldered, quiet-eyed, with the kind of presence that filled the room without ever raising a voice. Snow clung to her eyelashes. Her cheeks were streaked with tears she hadn't realized she shed. "You're Clara?" he asked gently. She nodded, terrified of what he'd say next. But Elias didn't stare at her swollen belly or question her trembling. He simply stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Come in," he said. "No one should be out in a night like this." And in that moment, once inside the warm cabin, Clara felt her frozen limbs begin to thaw, but her fear only sharpened. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, filling the small space with a gentle glow. Elias helped her shrug off her snow-soaked shawl, his movements careful, respectful, almost hesitant, as if afraid to startle her. She eased into the wooden chair he pulled out, holding her hands close to the fire until sensation returned in painful little sparks. Elias poured her a cup of hot tea and set it in front of her. "You look like you've had a long journey," he murmured, his voice low and even. "You're safe here. Rest a while." His kindness made her throat tighten. She hadn't expected warmth. She hadn't expected gentleness. And she certainly didn't deserve it, not when she hadn't yet spoken the truth he needed to hear. Her fingers curled around the warm cup, but her hands shook. She forced herself to speak before she lost her courage. "Mr. Thornton, Elias, there's something you need to know." Her breath caught. "Something they should have told you before sending me." He pulled up a chair across from her, his expression unreadable but patient. "Go on." Clara swallowed hard. Her eyes drifted to her coat, folded on the table. The curve of her stomach was unmistakable now that she wasn't hiding beneath layers of fabric. She knew he saw it. She also knew he was giving her the dignity of speaking first. "The baby," she whispered. He's not yours. He belonged to my fiancé. A kind man. He died before we could wed." Her voice cracked. "When the agency asked if I still wanted a placement, I said no. But they sent me anyway. They didn't tell you because they thought you'd refuse me." Silence stretched between them, thick and uncertain. Clara felt tears burn behind her eyes. "I understand if you want me to leave. Just, please let me stay until the storm passes. I'll work. I'll cook. I won't trouble you. I only need a few days of warmth before I find somewhere else." She braced for the disappointment, the disgust, the harsh words she had endured too many times. Instead, Elias leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. His gaze was steady, not cold, not judging, simply steady. "You came here honest," he said softly. "That's more than most." He shook his head. "You and your child aren't going back out into that storm." Clara blinked, stunned. "Stay," he said gently, "for as long as you need." Before either of them understood the depth of what was coming, Clara's new life quietly began. Clara stared at Elias, unsure she had heard him correctly. Stay? The word echoed in her mind like a soft bell, almost unbelievable. Every place she had passed through had pushed her away the moment they saw her condition. No one wanted a woman carrying another man's child. No one wanted the rumors, the responsibility, or the so-called shame. But Elias Thornton just kept watching her with quiet steadiness, as if he wasn't the least bit startled by what she'd confessed. He rose from his chair and added another log to the fire. Sparks leapt upward, sending warm light dancing across the cabin walls. "Storm's getting worse," he said, glancing toward the window where snow pressed thick against the glass. "Would be wrong to send you back out into that." His tone wasn't dramatic or self-sacrificing. It was simply matter of fact, grounded, as though kindness was the only reasonable path. Clara pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady the trembling inside her. "I don't want to make trouble for you," she whispered. "You didn't sign up for any of this." "No," Elias agreed calmly, "but trouble doesn't come from a child who hasn't even been born yet." He looked at her fully then, his expression steady. "And it doesn't come from a woman trying her best to survive." His words hit her deeper than he knew. He moved to the small cupboard and pulled out a wool blanket, draping it gently over her shoulders. "You'll stay in the spare room," he said. "It's not much, but it's warm. We'll figure things out after Christmas." Clara lowered her gaze, overwhelmed. "Why are you being so kind?" Elias paused. It wasn't a question he seemed to have been expecting. He rubbed the back of his neck, thoughtful. "Because everyone deserves a safe place to land, Clara, even if life didn't give them many." Something fragile inside her nearly cracked at that. He wasn't expecting anything. He wasn't demanding anything. He was simply offering shelter, offering dignity when he had every reason not to. Clara nodded slowly, unable to trust her voice. Elias gave her a small, almost shy nod in return. "Good," he murmured. Then it settled. As he stepped into the kitchen to prepare a simple supper, Clara realized something startling. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like an unwanted burden. She felt human. She felt seen. And without knowing it, Elias had already taken the first step toward becoming something more than a stranger, something steady enough to hold her broken pieces. The next morning, Clara woke to the soft glow of winter sunlight filtering through the small bedroom window. For the first time in a long while, she had slept deeply, without fear, without shivering, without the weight of judgment pressing down on her chest. A thick quilt covered her, smelling faintly of cedar and something warm and familiar. Elias must have laid it there during the night. When she stepped out into the main room, the cabin was already alive with quiet sounds, the low bubbling of a pot on the stove, the steady scrape of wood being chopped outside. Everything felt orderly, calm, so different from the chaotic life she had been running from. Elias returned a moment later, stamping snow off his boots. His hair was dusted white from the cold, but his expression softened when he saw her. "Morning," he said gently. "Hope you slept all right." Clara nodded, still adjusting to the strange comfort of being cared for. "I did, thank you." He motioned toward the table. "Sit. Breakfast is simple, but warm." She hesitated. She wasn't accustomed to being served, but she obeyed, easing into the chair as he ladled porridge into a bowl. It wasn't much, but to Clara, it felt like luxury. She ate slowly, trying not to appear ravenous. When she offered to wash the dishes afterward, Elias didn't argue. He simply nodded and stepped aside, letting her move at her own pace. He didn't hover or direct. He didn't correct her movements. He simply allowed her to contribute, treating her not like a burden, but like a person who belonged. Throughout the day, they fell into an easy rhythm. Clara swept the floors, dusted shelves, and folded linens. Elias repaired a loose board on the porch, tended the horses, and chopped firewood. Every so often he would glance inside to check on her, not with suspicion, but with quiet concern. And Clara found herself relaxing under his gentle watchfulness. She wasn't expected to be perfect. She wasn't expected to be anything more than herself. In the afternoon, when she stepped outside to bring him a cup of warm tea, the baby stirred within her, strong and reassuring. Elias noticed her wince and immediately slowed his work. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, surprised by how natural it felt to confide in him. "Just a kick." "He's lively today." A faint smile touched Elias's lips. "Good. Means he's strong." It was the first time anyone had spoken about her child without judgment, only hope. And as snow fell gently around them, Clara began to realize something unexpected. For the first time in months, she wasn't merely surviving. She was beginning to feel at home. As the days quietly passed, Clara found herself growing more comfortable in the warmth of Elias's small cabin, yet comfort came with a different kind of fear. When a person has been wounded enough times, even gentleness can feel dangerous. And Elias was gentle in ways she wasn't sure she could handle. Every morning, he greeted her with the same calm steadiness, asking if she'd slept well, if she was warm enough, if the baby seemed lively. He never pried, never pushed, never asked for more than she could give. And though Clara appreciated it deeply, she couldn't help feeling the edges of her old guilt tug at her heart. This wasn't the life she was supposed to have. Her child was meant to grow up with another man's name, another man's love. Somehow accepting kindness from Elias felt like she was stealing something that didn't belong to her. Late one evening, after dinner dishes were washed and the fire crackled softly, Clara sat at the table mending one of Elias's shirts. His steady presence filled the room as he repaired a broken latch near the hearth. They worked in silence, the kind that felt comfortable instead of heavy, but her thoughts wouldn't settle. "You don't have to do all this," she murmured suddenly, her eyes fixed on the needle in her hand. Elias paused his work but didn't look up right away. "Do what?" "Be responsible for me," she said quietly. "For us, I know this wasn't what you wanted." He set the latch down gently and finally met her gaze. "Clara, offering someone shelter isn't a burden. Not for you," she thought. "For you, everything seems so simple." But she didn't say it aloud. She couldn't bring herself to tell him how many nights she lay awake, worrying that he would realize she wasn't worth the trouble. Unbeknownst to her, Elias had walls of his own. Every time he saw her press a hand to her belly or move slowly with discomfort, memories rose like ghosts, his younger siblings, both small, both lost to fever in a winter not unlike this one. He had been helpless then, a boy with no power to save anyone. The weight of that failure had followed him into manhood. He feared failing Clara and her child the same way. But he refused to let that fear rule him this time. "We both carry things we don't talk about," Elias said softly. "That doesn't mean we face them alone." His words settled over her like a blanket warm, comforting, frighteningly close. And though neither of them said it aloud, something was quietly shifting between them. Their walls weren't falling yet, but they were beginning to crack. Christmas Eve returned with a vengeance, blanketing the valley in a fresh wave of winter that seemed harsher than anything Clara had yet seen. The storm rolled in quickly dark clouds swallowing the sky, winds howling against the cabin walls like a chorus of angry spirits. Elias secured the shutters, shoveled snow away from the door, and checked the animals twice. But even he looked uneasy as he stepped back inside, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Storm's picking up fast," he murmured. "Best stay close to the fire tonight." Clara nodded, but discomfort had already begun curling beneath her ribs. It started as a dull ache one she tried to ignore. She sat near the hearth, breathing steadily, hoping it was simply the strain of a long day. Elias prepared a simple stew, glancing at her often, sensing something was different. By the time the wind was screaming against the windows, the ache had sharpened. Clara gripped the arm of the chair, her breath hitching as a sudden bolt of pain tightened her belly. Elias was beside her instantly. "Clara?" "What is it?" She squeezed her eyes shut. I think, Elias, I think it's time." For a moment, he froze. Fear flickered across his face, real raw, a glimpse of the boy who had once lost everything. But it vanished just as quickly, replaced by a determined calm. "All right," he said firmly. "Let's get you to the bed." He helped her stand, supporting her weight as another contraction tore through her. The wind rattled the cabin as he guided her to the spare room. Lanterns were lit, blankets piled high, water heated. He worked with quick, steady efficiency. "Have you helped deliver a baby before?" she asked through clenched teeth. "Once," he admitted. "Long time ago. But I'll do right by you." The storm roared outside, snow slamming against the walls as if trying to break through. Inside, time narrowed to the rhythm of Clara's breaths and the steady encouragement of Elias's voice. He held her hands, wiped her brow, told her she was strong, that the baby was strong too. Hours blurred together. Finally, amid pain, sweat, and the fury of the storm, the child arrived. A small, squalling cry pierced the room, so fragile yet so powerful it seemed to silence even the raging wind. Elias let out a breath that broke into a shaky laugh as he wrapped the newborn in a warm towel. "He's here, Clara," he whispered. "He's here, and he's perfect," she sobbed, exhausted and overwhelmed, as Elias placed her son into her arms. And in the soft glow of lantern light, with snow raging outside and new life blooming inside, something irrevocable changed in him. He wasn't just protecting them anymore. He already belonged to them. The storm began to ease just as dawn approached, leaving the world hushed and heavy under blankets of snow. Inside the small cabin, warmth flickered from the dying fire, but it was nothing compared to the glow in Clara's arms. Her son, tiny, pink-faced, his fist curled around her finger, slept peacefully, oblivious to the turmoil that had brought him into the world. Elias stood nearby, watching them with a look Clara couldn't quite read. Awe, relief, fear, and something deeper, something she didn't dare name. "You should rest," he murmured. "I'm all right," she whispered, though exhaustion pressed hard against her bones. Elias hesitated, then sat on the edge of the bed. "Clara, there's something I need to say." Her heart tightened. She expected him to pull away now, to remind her that this wasn't his child, that their arrangement had never been meant for this kind of closeness. She braced herself, holding her son a little tighter, but Elias didn't retreat. His voice was quiet, steady, almost reverent. "When I heard him cry—" He paused, swallowing hard. "I can't explain it. Something in me settled. Something I didn't even know was broken." Clara stared at him, breath held. "You're not bound to us," she whispered. "You don't owe us anything. I won't let you feel trapped." He shook his head immediately. "That's just it. I don't feel trapped," she blinked, confused. Elias leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "Clara, I know the baby isn't mine, but when I held him, when I saw you fighting to bring him into this world," his voice thickened, "I realized I don't want either of you to leave." The words hung in the air, warm and fragile. Clara felt her breath catch, her throat tightening painfully. "Elias," she whispered, "are you saying—" "I'm saying," he interrupted gently, "that if you'll let me, I want to be here. For him, for you. Not out of obligation. Out of choice." Tears pooled in her eyes, slow, grateful, disbelieving. For the first time since her fiancé died, since her world shattered, she felt the possibility of a future she hadn't dared imagine. A family, not born of blood or expectation, but of kindness, courage, and choice. And as the baby stirred in her arms, Clara finally allowed herself to hope. By the time the storm fully cleared, the valley had transformed into a glittering world of white. Snow blanketed everything, the fences, the barn roof, even the old wagon tracks that once marked the road. But inside the cabin, warmth pulsed through the air like a gentle heartbeat. It came from the fire, yes, but also from something deeper, something stitched quietly between 3 lives over the course of one unforgettable night. Clara sat in the rocking chair near the window, her son nestled against her chest. His breathing was soft and steady, the tiny rise and fall of a life she had feared she'd have to protect alone. She rocked him gently, listening to the faint crackle of the fire. This room, once unfamiliar, now felt like a place her heart recognized. Footsteps approached. Elias appeared in the doorway, freshly returned from checking the animals. Snow dusted his coat, but his expression was warm, softened by something that looked almost like peace. "He's sleeping good," Elias murmured, stepping closer. Clara nodded, brushing a thumb along the baby's cheek. "He seems to like it here." Elias hesitated for only a heartbeat before replying, "I'm glad. I hope you do too." Her breath caught. "Elias," he raised a hand gently, not to silence her, but to steady the moment. He wasn't a man of grand speeches, but every word he spoke carried weight. "These days with you, with him, they felt like something I didn't know I was missing," he said quietly. "This house used to be too quiet, too empty." He swallowed, his voice roughened by sincerity. "But now it feels like a home." Clara's eyes burned with the threat of tears. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," he said firmly, stepping closer. "Clara, I'm asking because I want to ask. Not because I feel obliged," he exhaled, steady and earnest. "Stay. Not until the storm passes, not just until you find somewhere else. Stay because this can be your home if you want it." For a moment, silence wrapped around them, thick, warm, breathless. Clara looked down at her sleeping son, then back at the man who had delivered him, protected them, and opened his heart without ever asking for anything in return. "I want to stay," she whispered, voice trembling with hope. "If you'll have us." Elias's smile was small, almost shy, but it held a world inside it. "I already do." And so, in the quiet glow of a winter morning, a family was formed. Not by blood, not by expectation, but by kindness, courage, and a Christmas Eve that changed everything.